welcome to you all. I'm welcoming our respected panelists and every one of you who have gathered for our interesting session discussion on digital identity, transaction security, and fraud management. So personally, I'm curious, looking forward to this very interesting topic. Let me take a minute to introduce our respected panelists. We have Mr. Karthik Shinde, our moderator, partner and leader, cybersecurity, EY Consulting. We have Colonel Sandeep Khanna, CISO, UIDI. We have Mr. Ragesh Kunwar, National Leader, Identity and Access Management, OpenText. We have Mr. Srihari Kotni, VP CISO, Pine Labs. We have Siddharth Gandhi, CEO of One Cosmos. We have Mr. Pinakan Dev, Country Manager, OneSpan. Without further delay, I'm handing over, we can dive into the session, handing over to the moderator. Please, sir.
Thank you, Nadeem. I hope I'm audible. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope it was a good lunch and we are all back. We've had our shot of coffees. So I welcome you all into this session. I think we've had a brief prelude to what's going to be discussed, and I think very interesting points and thoughts have come across. So without further ado, I think I'll just set a brief context of this session. I think the panelists with me today have immense experience in the topic that we're going to discuss today, primarily around digital identities. The topic will focus on the identity frauds, identity theft, transaction security, what we are seeing on the ground, the kind of attacks, thefts that are happening, and particularly we have Sandeep here from UIDI. So I would personally like to exploit that opportunity and extract as much information as I can in terms of what Government of India has built on the Aadhaar platform. So that's a quick summation of what we would like to cover, and I hope you get to take away a lot of ideas and content that can be useful to you, whether you are a practitioner of cybersecurity or if it's a platform or an organization. How could you apply some of the things that we discuss here? So to set the ball rolling, I think while the digital transformation, we are seeing a very heavy. I personally have been in multiple digital transformation projects related to clients in the financial services space. And what I see is, it's an explosion of sorts that's truly happening, because it's not just about, a few applications going live or being digitized, but it's actually the true technology transformation that's happening, right at the app stage, the infra stage, at the middle level layer, whether it is building upon microservices or moving on to cloud. So there's immense, changes that are happening, right? And in midst of that, I think the traditional problems remain unresolved, right? And by that I mean, the plaguing problem of identity access management, which then again is of two parts. One is around the internal ecosystem, the workforce, the employees, and the second part is around the customers of all these financial services ecosystems, right? So I would like to primarily focus on these two parts and have the questions directed at yourselves. But I'll just go around and I'll start with you, Siddharth. As to what do you see from a product ecosystem perspective? Where are we going? what have you been hearing? And we'll probably spend half a minute each as to what do we see going around in the whole tech disruption space and your observations thereon.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here today. It's a very, very interesting topic, which is globally taking a completely new realm, right? And the reason why I say so is that for the last so many years, we've seen digital identity being seen in silos, right? You have one part of KYC. Once the KYC is done, it's done and it goes to probably the warehouse with the documents for the banks or FinSec. And then you have the digital identity created where the user is provided something that you know or what you have is a user ID and password. But the challenge that we face today is there is no link between the real world identity and the digital identity. What we are now seeing is converging of that, right? And with the new technologies available, whether it's smartphones to start with, blockchain, which also does address significantly the privacy requirements, is really taking center stage, right? So I think that to us is wonderful news because that's what we do as a product platform.
Rakesh, uh, it, more from the internal side of the ecosystem, is managing identities, access becoming an even bigger problem, because I don't think that was really solved in the first place.
Absolutely, I think you said it very well. If you look at the latest Gartner event that happened in Europe, the biggest focus was identity threat detection and response. That the new concept has come up, right? And identity is not new. We remember the thumbs impression that we used to do on old days, right? It all got digitalized. So we are going back to 25 years where we used to use our thumb. Now we are using a digital format, right? So while we talk about customers, I just want to understand from everyone, do you know how many places you have left your thumb impression while you were in this event? Or you have left your face, so your CCTVs, your cameras, in fact, our faces are getting captured, right? And open the door, you're leaving your biometric fingerprints landscape, right? So these are no more our personal stuff. They are all available in the market. Everyone can, take leverage of it and try to exploit the system. What matter most is how adaptive, real time your threat detection and how realistic your response time is to that is more important. Are we able to manage the internal risk? Because you need to understand the employees or business partners who are managing customer data, they are actually a custodian of customer data. We really need to make sure that while we're talking about customer being secure, we are trying to identify their authentications and their verification. Are we making sure that our internal entity and access management solution is robust? It works on the least privilege, it works on a zero trust framework. It talk about micro segmentation, because let's talk about even your business partner who are managing your IT infrastructure. They have complete access to your customer data. Can you make them accountable by using controls in the place? Can you make sure that not everyone have what they need, right? And when user is making a request, it has to be a contextual, right? The contextual in the sense who this person is, what sort of device he's using, which part of the world he is, how his behavior having, what is doing the same kind of stuff every day, or it's some sort of, difference in that. Is the system that you are building, the control that you are building is able to respond in a real time, right? Based on the context. So that's, I will say, workforce identity is very critical because that's where your data is being preserved.
Sure, we'll come back on that, on specific cases as well. But Shriyari, you earlier mentioned, the whole usernames and passwords. Are we sticking to that? And, is it going to become a passwordless ecosystem? And your analogy on this whole real and virtual world identity.
Right. Hello. Right. So, very touchy subject, right? So, so typically there are, two aspects, right? I've been seeing this consumer identity, right, since my I mean, many stints as a CISO and before that also, right? Like typically, starting from the first wallet in India and all, right? And also I'm seeing that as a customer, right? Today, uh, any bank you say actually, right? If you can steal someone's phone, I think you can steal his identity, right? So, and some banks who typically have got presence of a lot of senior citizens, right? Typically they write down on a paper, sir, this is your password and this is your reset password, and don't lose anywhere, you keep it in your ATM card, right? And don't come back to me again for resetting the password, right? So thing is actually that a person's, in the particular the fintech organization, the person's identity is actually his password, right? That's very funny. And second thing is, as a CISO, my first fight starts with any organization that why don't you make a passwordless? Not really, not technological passwordless, but why we are creating a password? He should open the app and he should do his transaction, right? When he do a financial transaction, we'll see later, right there, so this is actually every CISO fight actually, that that particular wallet is doing passwordless. They deliver the password actually on their SMS message. The resetting should not be so difficult that you have to ask for date of birth, mother's maiden name. Particularly the inclusion systems, many people actually give wrong date of birth, right? Typically the sales guy or the marketing guy will typically keep the date of birth as 01/01/1980 for everyone. So 50% of the population in India is actually having the same date of birth, right? so, so the problem is actually this, typically, identifying, in the fraud management perspective, it's not just about you enter a, stolen password or the OTP to send some money. Today, the payment services or the ecosystem gives you unlimited options, right? Something like I call the 5 principles of payment systems. Like one is no password, seamless access to funds. That means you are on pyjamas and wanted to taking a stroll with your son. Your son asks for ice cream, without anything, right? You should be able to make payment. That is the, typical the vision of the payment ecosystem, right? And there should not be any frauds, right? Even your loses 5 rupees also, like a customer will write to RBI saying that these guys have stolen my 5 rupees, right? Obviously, a customer's entitlement, even he should not lose even one paisa also, right? Fraudulently. And not only money, even the entitlement, something like a, like, he'll get some cashbacks, he'll get some vouchers and all these things, right? Which has to be delivered seamlessly, very easy to use, should not have any authentication, and they should not be stolen, right? So this adds lots of complexities actually on, there is a one side you have a user experience pressure, and the other side actually the customers data has to be protected, customers entitlements has to be protected. So this brings in a lot of challenges in the financial industry.
So, Shriyari, I think that's a good segue into. I'll point to Pinakin, and Sandeep, I'll come to you after Pinakin. But Pinakin, the point that Shriyari mentioned on, the frauds that are happening for the end customers, um, and we know that RBI has also put down stringent guidelines around the DPSC, Digital Payment Security Circular. Um, why do we still see so many frauds happening and the end customer being a victim? So if you can one highlight some of the trends that you see, uh, and what are some of the countermeasures that banks and other institutions are putting in?
Sure. So, as we say, digital identity is very important, but at the same time, the vehicles which are actually proving the digital identity at the consumer end also need to be safe and secure. For example, Siddharth mentioned about the smartphones, right? Mostly every bank, every financial institution is going the mobile way. They are providing the mobile apps which are there. However, every day in the newspaper, we have been listening that there is the frauds happening around the fake KYC frauds happening. Someone will call and say that okay, there is a KYC to be done. They will, install the remote access app, take the control of the app, and then they will wipe out the money. Whereas actually there is no KYC happening there. There can be app phishing, duplicate apps can be there. There can be the scenarios where the users are not updating their devices. There can be scenarios where they are connecting to the unsafe Wi-Fi. There is a man in the middle attack happening. So in this scenario, problem with the banks and the institution, and I think everyone in this hall will agree that mobile banking app or the particular app through which the digital identity is getting proved is their property. However, the environment which reside on so is not under their control. They are updated, not updated, or whatever the other ways. They are downloading the freewares, malwares, gamewares. How many of you are aware that Government of India is doing a fantastic job where banning some of those apps which are carrying the malwares, but still those apps are available. If you download, your kid downloads the app, and then that there can be an SMS forwarders into it, and the money wipes out from the account without even knowing that person has shared the OTP or not. Nowadays, this fraud is very popular, where user says that he has not shared the OTP, but still the money is getting wiped out. That's an SMS forwarders which is there. So now the thing is, what it is important, and which RBI is also putting a thrust on, is that application need to be safe and secure, no matter what the hostile environment is. Okay, but your app need to be safe, so that even if definitely user behavior is very important, which RBI is doing a job to educate the people. But assume that by mistake also, if user or unknowingly user is behaving where he is connecting to unsafe network or downloading some malwares and all, still your app is hardened enough to ensure that there is no external intrusion happening and stealing the data through which the digital identity proofing is happening for every transaction which is there. So the vehicle through which this is happening, that is also need to be safe and secure, or a platform that needs to be safe and secure. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Pinakin. And I saved the best for last. Sandeep, wanted to pick your brains on the whole digital identity ecosystem that we've built as a country, and that has become the enabler for a large chunk of digital payments disruptions that has happened in the country. And I think we are the number one globally as far as payments, instant payments is concerned. If you can just briefly enlighten us in terms of the journey that's come from 1.0 to Aadhaar 2.0, if I can call it that way, and how are we envisaging future risks, if any, in this space, because that's our base identity system.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So, as I say, Mera Aadhaar, Meri Pehchan. That's when someone said about real identity being mapped onto a digital identity, Aadhaar is the solution. So, way back in 2009 when it was conceived, or rather little before that in 2010 when the first Aadhaar was in September, I suppose 29 September, when it was given, and there onwards today, 99.9% of adult population having an Aadhaar. That is the reach which it has. So as far the India stack layer is concerned, the identity which is on the top of it is what is Aadhaar. Someone talks of passwordless, it is passwordless. So and primarily when we talk of Aadhaar, it is two things. One is your enrollment, that process which has taken place over a period of time, which is a continuous process. We are a populous country. We keep rather increasing our numbers, so that process goes on, then the updates go on. The main thing is in terms of authentication, what happens. So when you talk of Aadhaar as a solution, it has been privacy by design, security by design. When I say privacy, it's something like very minimalistic data has been captured in terms of your demographic details, in terms of your biometrics. That is what has been done. And going forward, we have made sure that all should know that your Aadhaar number is something which is personal to you. You don't have to share it like that. That's the reason it is now, we say it should be masked. There's a virtual ID which you can create, which you can use for it. Now, talking about the mechanisms which you've done in terms of authentication, we talk of an OTP-based authentication, which everybody is aware. We talk of KYC, which is like something which almost every bank uses now. In fact, initially, I would say that Jio had used it in a very extensive way of onboarding its customers. though subsequently there was, it is as of now an optional thing. It's not mandatory. So where biometrics is an option to do that, there is a limited biometric, there's an MFA possibility. That's the way the journey has been for last 10 years. The latest part has been in terms of face authentication, which has come into place. So now face authentication, a very live good example is in terms of e-Praman. So it's for question of live certificates, in case I'm sure if elders who are there at home, pensioners who are there, you don't have to, like during the COVID time, you don't have to walk up to the bank to do your live certificate verification. It was at home using an Android app, you could do that. That was in fact our first basis of doing a unassisted mode. Our entire process here has been assisted, means you have an operator doing the authentication for you, but now we're going on to the unassisted mode. Why we have graduated to it in a very deliberate way is because of frauds which have to be taken care of. That's what done. And it's seen a lot of traction, and we would take face authentication even way beyond that. That is what we're going to do. Talking in terms of fraud, yes, that's a big challenge we have. So what we have done in terms of biometrics is concerned, earlier we used to use FMR, that's called finger miniature read records. Now we have added an image record. We couple them together when your authentication packet is captured, bring in liveliness, use AI ML, and then authenticate. So that is the way we have gone about doing it. So that is currently the way. When you talk about future, maybe we'll talk subsequently.
Sure. And when you mentioned about the whole face authentication, and I wanted to quiz you on, with the new generative AI, being accessible to a common man, and it's so easy to now create fake videos. Is that going to be, do we see a real threat in terms of the video KYC, frauds going to the next level? Or is this face authentication mechanism a good way to combat some of those upcoming threats?
So currently, see, the issue is in terms of the liveliness detection, which is there. And yes, face authentication has this challenge in terms of its bypasses which take place. You can have a high resolution video to actually fake, to basically bypass the mechanism. But we have made sure that our processes are in place to make sure that it is there. In addition to it, we are also, we have certain techniques, we are ensuring that bypass does not happen. We also pick up certain more data to see that it is not spoofed and you're not able to do that. But yes, generative AI is something in the future which one is to reckon, to be cautious about, and rather the counter is again would be AI to it.
Right. So AI fights AI. Interesting. I would like to move on to what are the emerging trends that we see in the whole, whether it is combating transaction frauds or managing digital identities. Other than the traditional privileged identity management systems or identity and access management systems, what's new that's coming? Is there something that's going to make life easier, or is it going to be another daunting, project that organizations would have to implement to manage their identities? And I leave it open to, Rakesh. Siddharth.
Sure. So I think everything that been discussed in the past 23, 24 minutes, right? We've spoken about identity verification, KYC, and we've spoken about authentication. But I think the third missing component, which is I think very critical to address the fraud or having secure transaction, is privacy, right? How do you ensure privacy? And all of us, very at the most basic level, the premise of any privacy law, and probably GDPR being one of the most stringent one, is that the user needs to be in control of his or her identity, right? So what if we are able to bring the whole KYC or identity verification together, the authentication together, because now you have a verified identity, and the privacy piece, all three together to create a secure wallet, which is in control of the user. right? Which completely changes the ball game, because every time you need to share your PII information or personally identifiable information, you are taking consent of the user, right? And that wallet sits with the user and gets stored securely on the blockchain. The emerging trend, which has been around very interestingly, I was reading about it for the last 20 odd years, is something called PET and PPDSA, right? So privacy enhancing technology and privacy preserving data sharing and analytics, right? If you understand that, what is missing today is the whole privacy part. And if we start addressing and thinking about, if we are able to address a privacy piece, we can reuse the verified identity, reuse the KYC that's been done. So one doesn't really need to undergo a KYC every time I need to take a home loan or a bank loan if I'm already a customer of the bank, right? So that is going to be significant play in the near future, according to us.
Rakesh,
Okay,
anything on
I
the
think very well said. I concur with him. There are a few more things that I want to talk about in the latest trend that you're talking about, right? The risk is a core, right? When you talk about whether it's a workforce or consumer, you really need to have a response orchestration process in place, right? Uh, and it has to be in real time. It should not be based on static rules. It should not be based on the information that user has been captured. We talked about how do we define a digital identity. It's not just user ID and password. It's not biometric included. It's not facial. It has to be combination of multiple things, right? Can our system combine together more than one identity? And blockchain may be possibly another example where you're not just integrating identity information from bank, but maybe from insurance, maybe from his schools, maybe from his public government like Aadhaar ID. Can we create a integrated system where you don't just rely on one piece or one repository of the information for us to authenticate? That's a one piece, right? Second, I was talking about real time. So biometric or facial or passwordless, single factor cannot give you maximum security. You really need to have more than one. But again, the important aspect is technology adaptation. In India, we have so many different type of customers go to the rural bank. They don't possibly have a good even internet connectivity. They possibly may not have a smartphones, right? Come to the cities, they might have all the latest trend. But go to old age, we were talking about e-Praman. So are our customers who are quite old, are they tech savvy? Can they operate the smartphone, or are they relying on their children to do that, right? So I think there cannot be a single stick where you say this is what the solution is. It all boils down to your risk assessment, right? You should be doing a risk assessment, whether it's from internal or external. As I was saying, privilege access management, one aspect of it, right? Let's think about just one scenario, right? There is a P1 ticket happening, and that's in the middle of the night. Are you expecting an L3 to come on site? Possibly not, because response time need to be very fast. Can you use your technology to make sure that the L3 who's logging into it from home is really the one, right? Who he claimed to be. It may not be, it may be his wife. You don't know, right? So how do you control that? And your privileged users are one of the most powerful users where they own, they control, they manage not only employees' data, commercial data, but also the customer data, right? So you really have to have a smart control there. When I talked about governance. Governance cannot be a time-based. It cannot be once in a 3 month, once in a 6 month. Can your governance be a real time? Can your government be continuous in nature? It should not be ungoverned or not meeting governance compliance for even a single minute of the day. Can we build a control like that? That's the requirement, right? And as we're saying, you have eKYC we're talking about. eKYC, while we have government provided online eKYC repository, we really need to rely on more than one, as I said, right? Can we integrate, can we create an integrated system? That's the way to go. I think the technology disruptors like IoT, blockchain, right, AI, ML, because security is also always, it comes late in the game, right? So when we are putting together a solution, when you're adopting a technology like cloud adaptation, right? Are we giving security as a first? Security really need to be a first, not the last one. All the engineers, the architect, they need to first think about what they're designing, is it meeting the security requirement or not? Otherwise, more you are late, you are missing the bus. And last point possibly from my side, so far we have been talking about like fraud, right? We're talking about identifying the fraud and remediating it. I think the solution need to go on for front foot. Like in the cricket, right? Are you playing on a back foot or front foot? So we really need to be on a front foot. We should stop the attacks rather than, doing a forensic out of it or detection out of it, right? How proactively you're able to control is the way forward. If you're not able to control that, because data is already breached, what will you do? You will try to identify somebody who is responsible for that. But damage already happened. And if data is happening, data's loss is happening, your brand is getting impacted. Brand is unvalued. You can't value the brand, right?
Right. You mentioned about, and Siddharth, you also mentioned about blockchain being, a forward-looking technology that can be used to solve problems around identities and authentication and verifying the, true authenticity of a particular transaction or a user. Um, my question is more towards really what you also mentioned earlier on what the business really wants, right? And are we becoming enablers, or are we becoming really securities becoming a roadblock by putting in more and more controls, making life tough for the workforce as well as end customers? Case in point example, I'm using this mobile banking app, great security. I wouldn't name the bank, but asks me OTP like 1,000 times, because when I have to view the virtual card, it asks me an OTP. When now if I have to see the CVV, it again asks me OTP, and so on and so forth, right? So there's a thin line between, and it's not wrong. It's a mandate that has to be taken care of. My question is, as we look at more and more technologies coming in to make the world more safer, are we introducing more roadblocks? Because if you talk about blockchain, for example, it's a complex technology for even cybersecurity professionals to understand, let alone the end users who are struggling with username and passwords in the first place, right? Then you have your private key, public key, kind of demographics coming in. So how do you see that usability factor, coming in from a CISO perspective?
Well, certain I want to take a little bit of freedom here to express my views here. So, not related to anything from my company. See, I'm seeing a lot of pieces are ready now, right? So, in fact, certain organization, for example, today a bank offers mobile banking as well as web banking. If you see, the most of the frauds happens on the website banking, not on the mobile banking, because today mobile banking has got certain device binding, and there is a face recognition. There is a, if device is stolen, still it's a bit difficult, in case it's a good phone, bit difficult for a hacker to guess the pattern or the biometric or reset something, right? And the chances are less, right? And also, right, we have risk-based authentication, step-up authentication, which actually further takes the decisions, right, in order to prevent the fraud, right? And also we have, Aadhaar as a central identity platform, right? And you have CKYC, which actually, when you go to the new, any bank, just you give a CKYC number, you don't need to resubmit your KYC data, right? There are so many technological pieces. If I summarize them, what should be the way forward, in my view, is that every bank, right, typically you are identified with your username and a password. Rather, not only banks or any services, and it can be your employment also. So a person has to carry his identity. He has to bring in the identity. His identity should not be what username, password given to him. Rather, actually, what he brings the identity through some kind of centralized system, either KYC or it can be multiple, like other kind of organizations can be awarded multiple, where the customer has got a choice to bring his identity to the table where we should be able to identify the person. Second, very funny thought I have that there are a lot of frauds are happening when people transfer the money or anything, right? There is a sender identity with your username password, but what about the receiver's identity? So can we have some rating saying that look, this guy is a verified recipient not a fraudulent recipient, right? So even for receiving money you should have some identity, so that when digital world, when we are actually transferring the money, right, there is I think there was a news article yesterday, day of yesterday, someone has used the AI to use, like a to masking his face actually, right? He morphed his video. It looked like his friend is talking and actually he has transferred the money. I think in China or somewhere it happened, right? So so there is a recipient and there is a sender identity has to be verified, and person has to bring his own identity, and we have this risk-based technologies and all. With all these pieces together, and if the right regulations are pushing, otherwise every company will be lazy to identify or adopt the new technologies. What I have seen is that traditionally password is really, has lost its sense actually, right? Today also people are insisting that, and again we are moving back to the password, but actually password is not adding any value, right? OTP identity, ideally you should carry some kind of token or the kind of certificate, etc. But we had a cheaper means of OTP, and OTP is causing most problems here, right? And many banks actually adopted to this OTP method so conveniently that there is little option given that, in case you wanted to upgrade your identity factor, right? If I wanted to use a token or a certificate, etc., very few banks are giving this option. So I think we have all these pieces together. If put forward with the right regulatory push and with the choice for the customer, I think we should be able to, solve many fraud issues, right, in the digital economy through right investments.
Yeah, I mean, the last point that you mentioned is, we either look at two-factor or we look at multi-factor, right? And bring in, the multi-dimensional sense of authentication, as previously also mentioned. Uh, what are your views, Pinakin, on this whole, transaction-based security? While authentication happens, there are many other avenues for a malicious user to really either intercept the communication or completely hijack a particular transaction. So whether it is SIM card cloning or man in the middle. So what are some of the industry trends that you see, particularly on the safeguarding side of things?
Right. So let's accept the fact that industry is moving, or industry trend is moving towards the user behavior, user convenience. That's very important actually, which is that no one can deny that, okay, I can implement the security and you can convince the user to go for the inconvenience. No one will accept, no user will accept, and probably the customer or consumer will run away to their competitions. That's how it will be there. So user convenience and user behavior is very, very important. And having said that, even the fraudsters are also moving on those directions, observing the user behavior and user convenience, and taking the advantage of those loopholes which are there. So while user behavior is definitely required to be in discipline, but definitely looking at the India population, which is at in millions and millions of numbers, what is important is securing the platform through which these services are getting consumed. It's very important, which is shielding those platforms and ensuring that whatever the transaction which is happening through the secure channel communication, so that even if user unknowingly, for example, user unknowingly connects to the malicious Wi-Fi, he is not having that, you can say the internet connectivity, and he is connecting to the malicious Wi-Fi and transferring the money, still he is protected, because the thing is there's a secure channel communication is happening. Second thing is, by mistake, if you are downloading some gamewares or freewares on the device, and then it tries to forward those OTPs and all, which is that at least his financial transactions are protected, and no those such kind of applications are allowed. So
And these controls are plugged into the mobile application itself? They kind of harden the
Yes.
application? Okay.
Yes. So it's irrespective of the any device. It is specific to the mobile application. So, our data protection law says that we are not supposed to touch the user device. I mean, we should not touch the user device. We should respect the privacy, as Siddharth mentioned. So we should not be touching the user device. At the same time, shielding the app itself, APK or IPA file, and ensuring that those apps are basically not intruded by the external factors which is there. At the same time, the device is free to operate the way which a user want to operate, because nowadays everything is moving towards mobile. And one of the survey was that 80% of all the millennial adults are right now on the mobile payments, which is there, right? So if you see, and that will keep growing, which is now in this scenario, we have to keep the user convenience and security in the center by providing such security layers in picture. Yeah.
Excellent. I think I see the last 5 minutes, and maybe we'll open the questions to the audience in case there are any questions for the panelists.
We have been talking about blockchain as one of the solutions, but in case of privacy, for example, the right to forget, which is key, and that is completely undone by the nature of the blockchain infrastructure. So how do we deal with that?
So from the privacy law perspective, right? The data that gets stored on the blockchain can get accessed only by the private key of the user, right? Once the user deletes or remove his profile, right? Effectively, nobody, neither us as a service provider, nor the owner of the tenant, for example, the banking owner, right? The bank is the owner, can access that information, right? So just by the virtue of deleting the digital persona, the data is inaccessible, right? And yes, there are ways and means in which you can also erase the information from the blockchain, right? But from a privacy law perspective, you can very much comply with right to forget.
My question is to Sri Hari. I know actually, I may be right, I may be wrong, I'm not sure. But the line which you said that web is more prone to, got a fault crimes, So I think mobile is much more easy to access. Much fraud can be happen in mobile. So as far as I studied, but you people are expert, you can just guide me on this.
So what I meant to say is that today web is actually a kind of, you can access anywhere, right? So the mobile actually is something a person will be holding it. If there is a possibility that this mobile will be mapped to his identity. So the chances of identity stealing is actually reduced with the mobile banking more effectively than the web-based banking. That's what I meant to say. So today actually you enumerate or brute force or steal someone's password, right? Shoulder surfing or whatever it may be. You can access someone's bank account, right? Using today most of the bank accounts operate on the username and password. But mobile phone means like someone actually has to get hold of that mobile and should know how to really unlock that mobile phone. Then only he can access, and there will be MPIN, etc. Right? So that's what I meant to say, that certain identity, authentication problem, frauds are actually reduced using the mobile banking rather than web-based banking. Right? That's what I meant to say.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have one last question. That's it.
Hi, thanks for a very informative session. It was very educative. So you spoke about identities in the context of customers and identities in the context of the organization. Isn't supply chain another significant domain that needs to be considered in that space? That's the first part. The second part is to do with digital identities and what the Aadhaar identity that exists today. So considering that a lot of that data has been publicly available, is it not, I guess, isn't there opportunity for that to be abused or misused? And I'll give you a specific example. So for example, if any of you have purchased a property or rent a property and have registered that agreement is available online for everybody to see with the full details there. So all of the elements that were used to construct that identity are now publicly available. These are the two separate questions. Thank you.
So I'll take the second one. So no, yes. When I say that, okay, there is data available, this discussion was on earlier also, in terms of in some bits and pieces, you find that, okay, your Aadhaar is there because, which is a violation of the Aadhaar Act. Please remember that Aadhaar is an act of parliament, so it has got some penal actions also. I agree to that there are compliance issues here, but then it is just in a piecemeal form. When it comes to authentication of your identity, it is done at the UIDI data centers. So when I say in terms of a yes or a no or a biometric, the request will come to the system here, nowhere else. So there's no other way mechanism of doing an authentication process. So that should allay your fears in terms of saying that you can use this data maybe to an extent to profile someone, fine, that's okay, but not use it to bypass an authentication mechanism within the ecosystem. That is what I have seen in my stint here.
Okay, so your question on a supply chain as well, the first one, right? So from a supply chain perspective, where does the identity and access management comes into picture? From a tracking of the consignment, you have a lot of IoT devices which will be helping you track the consignment, where it is, who is the supplier, who is the consumer. That also important. That's where identity and access management comes into picture. And then when you have multiple organization being part of this, so just consignments are not delivered by one organization, but combination of more than one organization, maybe part of it done by one company and the other one. So how do they integrate? How do they federate the information which is being used to track, to identify, and to verify the system, right? Just because I got an opportunity, I just want to thought about, there's a one latest thread that we're talking about, honey trap, right? What is the solution for honey trap? Has anyone thought about? Recently, we have seen, in one of the big defense organizations, there was a honey trap happened, and it was one of the very senior officer, and entire information was leaked. I asked my question when I was thinking about it, why do he need to have all the technical and architecture information? That's where the leakage of governance was not there. The proper governance in terms of who need to have what access was not there. He had entire information at his disposal. So honey trap, one of the oldest one, and it is very relevant today.
Absolutely. All right. We've come to the end of this panel discussion. I think we could go on for hours. We have time for one more, Nadeem. We can take it offline. Should we take it?
Hello, I have one question.
Yeah.
See, when you give password or OTP, it's like giving consent to action. But when you have facial recognition, facial authentication, or iris, I mean, see, there is no consent to that. So one can capture that without your consent, so one can capture that. So how is making it more secure?
So the design of the workflow is important to understand, right? So when you look at authentication, right, when you enter your user ID, password, and press enter, right, at that point in time, you're giving your consent of sharing the information that you know or what you have. During biometric, right, you're first identifying yourself, and before you give your biometric, you're giving consent that you're sharing that information. But I want to clarify that the biometric information is not being sent to the end server from an authentication standpoint. What is important to understand from a passwordless standpoint or passwordless authentication is at the back end, it's exchange of cryptographic keys and not the biometric. At least I'm talking about the solution in general from a passwordless standpoint. From an Aadhaar authentication standpoint, it's slightly different, I'm assuming, the way it works, right? So there's a difference in what really happens when we say passwordless. It's not really exchange or sending of actual biometric information.
Just to add to the consent part, when you get enrolled, that is the time when you're given your consent. And there are three ways of authentication which you talk of. One is OTP, the other is biometrics. In the biometrics part, there is facial also. So it covers the consent part. And when we capture, and as far as security is concerned, when we capture that thing, that is encrypted, and what is shared is it goes as a template. In fact, just for info everybody, that your data from the enrollment, the day it is captured, it is encrypted at source and remains for the entire life cycle as encrypted. Only templates are used. So then a template is used for referencing it for doing the face authentication. It's not face matching, it's a 1:1 match. It's face authentication.
Okay.
Thank you so much who have gathered here for the discussion, and a special thanks for all the panelists for the very informative insights on this very critical topic, right? So I know this discussion can go on and on, as we can see here, but with respect to time, we have to wrap. And I'm requesting all the panelists to accept our token of appreciation, and thanking once again everyone. Thank you. Please.